Hey folks, welcome to a special No Holds Bar MLK Day episode of the Political Education for Freedom podcast. I'm Nitra, and today we're diving into the raw, unfiltered side of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We're talking about his real thoughts on white supremacy, white dominance, and yes, even white liberals. Yeah, we've been hearing that a lot, right? Well, buckle up. It's going to get a little controversial, but that's okay. We can do this, right? We always do. So, we all know Dr. King for I Have a Dream, right? Yeah, I know we do because I teach it. It's actually one of the, I think that's one of the only speeches actually that is recorded in the textbooks. Even the way they structure the books when they discuss MLK, it's like MLK, I Have a Dream. It's like the two are inseparable. We all know the former congressman, now ancestor, John Lewis, who passed. Latest book was Good Trouble. We know he was there. He was very young. He spoke at the march. There were other people slated to speak, but they didn't. And that was for all sorts of different reasons, mainly optics, politics. The current administration at the time gave a lot of pushback on what would be said at the march. They wanted it to be violent so that they can react to it. One of the things I talked about in one of the episodes I talked about with the ideology of white supremacy and how it affects the mental makeup of white people because they've bought into white supremacy. And that's been going back since before Martin Luther King, of course. That went all the way back to before the Civil War. There was during slavery, after slavery. A lot of it was, and a lot of it contributes to why Dr. King really wanted a nonviolent protest. But so there was, a lot of information, attention about what was to be said. A lot of people had different inputs on it. A lot of people changed their speeches. John Lewis, of course, was one of those who changed his speech. His speech was a little bit more militant than what was said, and though the members of SNCC had a lot to say about it too. They had their thoughts, but they basically toned it down. They tried to make it as if they toned it down for us, but in actuality, I can kind of get the gist of why they toned it down. They didn't tone it down for us. They toned it down for them, meaning the white racists, meaning the violent white racists, because we know that it takes nothing for their true colors to come out, and they begin to act like their normal selves, or they allow their cousins or uncles and aunts to act like their normal selves. I mean, they needed the National Guard to escort a 6-year-old to school, and it wasn't because of the kids. Right, exactly. So, and that was the whole neighborhood. It wasn't like it was people who was saying no and this is not right. Yeah, if it was only a few and we didn't see them. But anyway, that's what we're going to talk about today, because Martin Luther King had a lot of words for them. But a fun fact about his speech at the March on Washington, those that were sitting behind him, they felt like he was bombing it, right? Because it's a long march. I think he was the last one to speak. It was sort of all day. They had different it wasn't just a march. They had march, they had speakers, people were singing. I believe the Jubilee singers sang there. I know Mahalia Jackson sang. Who else? It was some more, but there were a lot of speakers slated to speak. But Mahalia Jackson was sitting down, like right near him, on side of him. And while he was speaking, he said, "Tell him about the dream, Mark." And that's when he goes into, "I had a dream that, one day this, and this, right?" But actually, his have a dream, that part of the speech, and that was impromptu, but it was, not sort of rehearsed, but he basically knew it. But that dream actually came from a young SNCC member. I think she was 14 at the time. I cannot remember her name. I will remember it and put it in the show notes. But she told MLK about her dream, and that's how it sort of spiraled on from there. It wasn't her words exactly, but it was the idea of the dream came from her. It was her dream. It was something she did dream about, equality and all of that. It's a young kid. I think she could have been 13, 14. She was very young, like maybe middle school age, if not high school, if high school barely. And so so that's where the part of the speech, "I have a dream." Now, you probably don't even know what other speeches Martin Luther King has done that he did before that and after that. There's another fact about the speech. When he did give the speech, it didn't sort of what we would call go viral instantly. No, that's not what happened. It actually didn't go viral until a few weeks later, and that was the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Montgomery. Say Montgomery. I always get Alabama and Mississippi mixed up because they were similar. But I believe it was the 16th Street Church bombing, and that was in Alabama. I'm almost certain about that. But they always talk about the 4 little girls, right? 4 girls that were bombed. That's when that speech actually started to get some traction. It's been a month, maybe about a month. It was weeks after he had gave the speech on Washington. Didn't get a huge stir instantly, but the bombing of the church and the 4 girls that was slaughtered from those white supremacists blowing up that church. And then there was actually 4 girls died, and there was a 5th girl that was injured. She was permanently blind from that. Her sister passed away. Even after that, there were 2 boys that were murdered in the streets after the bombing because they were, mad, upset about what had happened at the church, and they were just, going out in the street, pissed off, and white supremacists killed them. Let's say one was shot by police, and I want to say the other was shot by white supremacists. The speech that MLK gave, the "I Had a Dream" speech, it really didn't blow up until like 4 weeks afterwards, after he gave the speech, after the March on Washington. And the reason for that was the Birmingham, Alabama 16th Street church bombing. There were 4 girls that was murdered inside the church. There was one other girl who was injured. She was permanently blind. And then there was 2 boys that was murdered outside the church in response to it. So that was Denise McNair, Cynthia Wesley, Addie Mae Collins, Carol Robertson. There was the 4 girls that died inside the church. And then Sarah Collins Rudolph, that's the girl that was injured, permanently blind. And then Virgil Ware and Johnny Robbins shot outside the aftermath of the bombing that same day. And you can read more about this on our website at politicaleducationforfreedom.org/16th. That's the number 168-Street-Church-Birmingham, and that'll take you right to the story. And that's a story for kids too. It's not just for adults. There's some other resources on that story too as well. I believe there may be a lesson plan and some guiding questions for students and or adults. So that was just a quick fun fact about MLK "I Had a Dream" speech. But today we're going to talk about the dream he had that didn't make it to the school textbook. Yeah, Dr. King wasn't just about peaceful marches. He had some tough words for the white power structure and even for white allies who just didn't get it. You'll hear now, it was a taboo to talk about white allies before. Now you'll hear it more, a lot with some of the anti-racist scholars or DEI scholars. I don't know what to call them. I really don't like anti-racist, but that's what they've been calling themselves for sometimes. So whatever, no big deal. But you'll hear them criticizing white allies a lot more than before in the 60s, which Martin Luther King was on the right path, because a lot of what he said, we have to say it now, and that's because at some some point, either it wasn't said or it wasn't loud enough, or those white allies just didn't listen. They probably never even read the damn. So MLK had he wrote a few books, actually, pretty decent book. I liked the last one. The last book, that book was published after he was assassinated. I like Why We Can't Wait. So where do we go from here? Chaos or community? That's a lot of what I'll be reading from today. I'm gonna read you some excerpts, probably play a few excerpts of him and some of his speeches. The where do we go from here? Chaos, community. It's a question, right? The title of the book is actually a question. Well, he answers the question at the end of the book. He gives a detailed plan of what needs to happen towards the very end of the book. So yeah, there is that was a question, but he answered it. He addressed in that book, Where Do We Go From Here, was white supremacy in the context of housing, education, and economic mobility. This is what he said. Whites, it must frankly be said, are not putting in a similar mass effort to re-educate themselves out of their racial ignorance. It's an aspect of their sense of superiority that white people of America believe they have so little to learn. In this quote, he is highlighting the systemic nature of racial issues in America by pointing out the complacency and the thought process among a lot of white Americans regarding racial inequality. He emphasizes the need for a societal shift in attitude and understanding to address ingrained issues in housing, education, and economics, which of course all were significantly affected by discrimination and white supremacy. In his later years, Dr. King did mince words about white supremacy. He called it out, not just in the South, but everywhere, you name it. He wasn't shy about saying that this wasn't just a, quote, bad apple problem. It was systemic, deep-rooted in American society. And he especially talked about it in the book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. He addressed specifically white liberals. He talked about the, quote-unquote, white moderate who was more devoted to order than justice, who preferred a negative peace, which is absent of tension, to a, quote, positive peace, which is the presence of justice. Sound familiar? Yeah, that's just what's going on today. And here's an excerpt from the book, Where Do We Go From Here? He says, often white liberals are unaware of their latent prejudice. A while ago, I ran into a white woman who was anxious to discuss the race problem with me. She said, I am very liberal. I have no prejudice towards Negroes. I believe Negroes should have the right to vote, the right to a good job, the right to a decent home, and the right to have access to public accommodation. Of course, I must confess that I would not want my daughter to marry a Negro. Dr. King has such grace listening to this woman. He said, this lady could not see that her failure to accept intermarriage negated her claim to genuine liberalism. She failed to see that implicit in her rejection was the feeling that her daughter had some pure, superior nature that should not be contaminated by the impure, inferior nature of the Negro. He said it is a Teutonic origin theory warmed over. The question of intermarriage is never raised in a society cured of the disease of racism. Now, isn't that something? Like, that's the whole point of him saying that whites need to re-educate themselves out of their racial ignorance. Like, she can't even, and it quells the notion of it's just that these are just bad apples. No, it quells that. It's not just bad apples. It's systemic. It's all of y'all. It's everybody. Yeah, that is true. It's everybody. Like, unless you have been doing some kind of work in opposition to what your culture has taught you to be like, then yeah, it's you too. It's not, this is not something that is, it's hard because it's ingrained in you to think this way or to think that way, not because you did it, of course, but society created this. And so even though you want to, in your mind, heart, body, or whatever, want to feel or portray or be a normal human being that wants justice and equality for everyone, this system, this country itself, this country specifically, has conditioned your brain to think otherwise. And every part of the society does it. Even black people. We've been trained that way. The difference is that us black people, they teach us to be anti-black towards each other. They don't teach us to be anti-white. So it's what he's calling out right now. You see that a lot. We can see it more, even more now than before. But it just kind of goes to show you, especially in the workplace and stuff, how, you may think you have an ally out there, but even some of the best allies, there is a strong prejudice